to the Varietal Show. My name is Rory, and if you've never been here before, you're watching Varietal Literature. It's a YouTube channel, sorry. A little quiet. My audio just slightly. Do let me know if the audio mix is good or not. Anyhow, this is a little cozy corner of the internet for narrative and people who love stories, like me. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to play a game that's going to give us prompts to do some writing. And you folks, if you're watching this live, there is a live chat. You can help me the vistas of this hike, because the board game concerns the Appalachian Trail, a thing I've never hiked, in a lot of states I've never been to, because I haven't been to a lot of places in America. I'm not American. So I will be drawing on my own experiences of hiking for the most part, but you are welcome to name creatures and trees and things that you find interesting or know about that, if that's your own state or near it or you've been there. And together we're going to weave a little travel log of the first little bit of a trail in a board game. If you are not watching this live, though, obviously you can't join in the live chat, but down in the description below, there will be timestamps that allow you to jump ahead to whatever part of the show interests you the most, including if you just want to know what we came up with at the end. I'm just going to catch up with chat, and then I'll describe to you the game we're playing, give you a little rundown of its rules. We'll get to some writing. But first, of course, Zevia. Apparently, there's vanilla in here. Tammy says, good evening, all my favorite peeps. Oh, that's very kind of you to say, Tammy. Hope everyone is doing well today. Hope everyone is staying warm and safe out there. Yes, it is blowing and raining, and has been for a few days around here. It's still unseasonably warm here, and I'm on this weird crest where I am if I close the window entirely, it gets too warm in here, but it's open right now, which is kind of too cold. That's why I'm wearing my shirt. But I'm probably still going to get too warm because doing this warms me up. A lot of talking and stuff. It doesn't look like much, but it always makes me warmer. So we'll see what I wind up doing. I'm probably going to wind up taking the shirt off. But it's cold here for sure. Cooler than it was. Genera says they're from the south. Even 55 degrees is freezing to me. I don't know what that means. Let me look it up in my Canadian units. 55 Fahrenheit to Celsius. 12 degrees. Okay. Yeah, I'd say that you're in good company there. That is not too much for me, but you're in good company there. Where a lot of people do start to feel the chill at 12 degrees. Tammy says this is my last time on the stream for a while. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. My shoulder surgery is on the 19th, so I won't be able to use my right arm for a few months. Ooh. Definitely lurking in the background. Is it possible to use voice to text if you really want? We'll certainly miss you. Maybe you'll learn that left-handed texting. That's a long time to be out of commission. I'm sorry to hear that. Well, we'll know you there. You're there, Tammy. At the very least. Gym Store is having some problems with the YouTube app. Yeah, man, they had a great app. One of the better apps. Way better than the Twitch app, by the way. And then in the last, 4 months, they've been messing around with it, and none of it has made it better. Jump Store says, lol, Rory, don't know freedom units. No, I only know the units that the vast majority of the world uses. I say that a little tongue-in-cheek. I'm not actually going to start a pointless little war about measurement. And Uncle Kitty is here, which, of course, he said he was going to be here last time, but for the foreseeable future, which is a wonderful addition. Boy, I am getting off track. I did want to address one last thing. Tammy says I want to ask Rory if we can do some Native American folklore. So, I would love to do Native American folklore. There's a couple of issues with that. The first one being, I don't really think I'm the right person to be delivering it, but I would be perfectly comfortable with having Native American folklore read via my stream. Like, it's not too much to move it around, and I did do that in the first year of operation. It was sort of a mixture of an interview of an author friend of mine, and he told a few tales briefly from his traditions. He's a Cree man, which you can find. It was, I remember it was the end of September, the first year we were running, so 2021, but I don't remember what I called it. Maybe something about the Wendigo. But I kind of feel like I have to have a pretty solid understanding of a culture to be reading their stories, and I don't. The second thing is Native American encompasses, like, that's like saying Europe, right? Like, it encompasses a great deal of different cultures, and the different cultures have different sort of restrictions on how they want that stuff transmitted. Some cultures have a set of stories they're fine with being read by just about anybody, and others are quite more restrictive, and I just never felt like I was going to step right in that. But I'm open to suggestions about how to approach it. But it is very interesting. I've certainly read a lot of it. Which reminds me, where is it? Here. A friend of mine gave me this. It might be a bit hard to find. It's called, Taktumi. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. It's an anthology of Arctic horror stories, but what it really is an anthology of small First Nations writers, little horror stories based in their sort of cultures and their surroundings, which is the dark frozen north. That's very effective. Like all short story collections, it's real mixed bag. Some are meh. Some are kind of comically not so great, and others are excellent and worth the time. But anyways, it's if nothing else, it's a good little examination of the atmosphere of the far north. Jumpstore says, so no Jewish folklore. I did do Jewish folklore once. Oh my god. Okay, well, this is going to go back later. I'll try to answer this quickly. I did do one episode of Jewish folklore. I'm trying to remember what my source was for it. It was a collection of Jewish folklore, but I can't remember. This was probably, it was around Christmas, obviously, because it was for Hanukkah. It was maybe the first year, so it might have been 2021. But I even as I was doing it, like I was a little more confident on that because I knew more about Jewish culture for a few reasons. I don't want to go into depth about it, but like, if nothing else, I just worked in an office that was exclusively Jewish women for a very long time. So through cultural events and stuff like that. That's not the only source, but just as an example, it wasn't unfamiliar to me. But even as I did it, I was like, I don't feel like I'm very well equipped for this. I don't feel like I'm giving this the best shake it can get. I think I'm probably missing things and understating some points and overstating others and whatever. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. You can go back and watch it and tell me if I'm wrong and it was fine, whatever else. Anyhow, they are ideas that I continue to have. I would like to, but I guess the summary of all of that is I would like for, if I'm going to do that, to let people who can give that sort of the depth and impact it needs to have. Not me looking at some Wikipedia pages and like pretending like I know something. As if I haven't done that already sometimes, I guess. But I try not to. Guess what? Shirt's coming off. It is too warm. I noticed no Witchery today. Guess Witchery is busy. Hopefully she's okay. I know she was surfing a couch, which is not a pleasant way to sleep. Yeah, it will jump store because I realized midway in my mind that was a part of the Christmas cycle, and then I was like, no, it was Hanukkah. I think I might have even been late on it too. It's my first year. Give me a break. Okay. Let's talk about this game. This part of the show is called litgames, and it stands for literature games, and it means it's my umbrella term for all the various many 10,000 different names that we have for indie tabletop RPG kind of things. In this case, it's more of a board game, but it does involve some role playing, and I think it'll work as a prompt system for writing, which is really what this segment is about. I say segment, it is the show. There are other segments, I haven't done them in like 2 years. Anyways, let's talk about the game and explain the sort of structure of what we're doing, and then get to some writing. Jumpstore says she might be sick. She does tend to get sick a lot. Yeah, unfortunately. Might just be busy too. If you're watching this later, Witchery, hope you're okay. Okay, so this game does not come from itch.io, which is where my games often come from. So I'm going to tell you where you can get it from in a minute, but I am going to have a little caveat here. I don't get like donations or anything like that for promoting any of these games. I don't have relationships to anybody. The most that ever happened is after I had streamed a game, one of the creators of the game sent me physical copies of it, which was very kind of them. But anyways, I'm not really here to show games or be sponsored or whatever else. I just like playing them. The reason why I mentioned that is itch.io is a good middleman where I trust. If I tell you something is there, if you like it, go buy there. I don't feel like anything really bad's going to come out of that because itch.io is pretty reliable. This is just a website. As far as I can tell, they run on Shopify, so I think your information is probably secure if you choose to buy here. They have a collection of games that they call print and play, and what they ultimately are card and board games more than traditional tabletop RPGs like we have typically played, but they're digital files that you buy and download and then take to a print shop and get printed if you want, or you can print them on your home computer or whatever else. And it's called pnparcade.com. I don't really know much about them. I didn't see anything that gave me any red flags when I was buying them, but I do want to be clear, I'm not officially endorsing anything. But this game is free on there. It's one of their free games. If you're curious about it, just make sure you mind your flank as far as internet security goes. I don't know them. And always be careful with your information and what websites you give it to, and whatever else. The one thing that does make me more comfortable with recommending this is because it is just a digital file, so I know you'll get your files if you choose to go and pay for it. They have a game here that I almost bought for you specifically, Jumpstore, which is a game where you collect resources for tea, and then you have a handful of cards and they're different denizens of your tea shop, and they have their own little requirements, and then you have a cup that you put the ingredients you have and try to best meet their needs for tea. Okay, so that's where this game is from, pnparcade.com. Buyer beware on anything. I don't really know what their relationships to the creators are, but they seem to be several different creators. And the way this one works is you have a bunch of different dice. I'm using my one deck dungeon set somewhat for this because they like to have their dice colored certain ways. I don't think the colors really matter too much. You just need to keep track of which ones you're rolling and whatever else. It's all D6 dice. They recommend dry erase markers and a dry erase map, so you print it out and laminate it. That'll make a dry erase. And printing out the objective cards. We're not going to do that. We're going to use Roll20 to do this. Jumpstore says, Rory, now we have to play it one day. Yeah, I might. I was thinking maybe around Christmas because it seemed cozy and warm. But then I was thinking, like, I don't know. There are other tea games I've played in the past too. Maybe I should just bring those back. Because it is like, I don't know, $8 Canadian or something like that. Not nothing, but it's not a lot, I guess. Anyways, we'll go over the map in a minute. But the goal of the game is to walk the Appalachian Trail. If you don't know it, it's a trail that takes months to travel. Depending on what direction you go, it's from... I'll show you the map here. It's from Maine down to Georgia. Or Georgia up to Maine. And I'm assuming, anyways, I suppose I should have checked this, but I'm assuming it follows the Appalachian Mountains range, and that's probably what ties it together. But it is like a 6-month trail, often hiked in chunks. There's versions of trails like this all over the world. And when is Hanukkah this year, Gem Store? Anyways, the way it works is you start in one direction. I'm starting in the snowy end of it, Maine. You start in March, and then you hike until October. And when you hit October, you're sort of in your final round of play. There's a bunch of little modifiers and details I'm not going to talk through here about how weather becomes more likely to be bad depending on the region you're in and whatever else. But the gist of it is, as you march around and move, you consume water, which you need to use an action to replace. You consume energy, and you can accrue exhaustion. And then as each turn, you choose 2 things you can do. Well, 2 dice anyways. And you roll them, and that completes the task in one way or another. And this is why the colors of the dice matter. So for example, for leisure activities, there's only 1 white dice. And leisure activities are like taking a photograph, receiving a stamp at a shelter, whatever else. The 2 orange dice are movement dice, and basically you can roll them, or I think both of them, because it says 2 dice, not 2 actions, to figure out how many spaces you move, and every time you move a space, you consume 1 of your energy, and you regain that energy by taking a rest action, and so on and so forth. Anyways, it's probably best if I don't read too much of this ahead of time, because a lot of it is the kind of game where you can play it, start playing it, and just quick check the rules as you go along. But that's the gist of it. It's a roll and walk kind of game, and then you choose how you're going to manage your resources versus your movement. And it is designed to be played with several people if you want, on your own separate maps, which I find a little odd. I'm not sure. It seems like a lot of us would be sitting in the corner of the room hiding our maps. I don't know about that choice. But as far as us, as a solo game, the solo mode is pretty simple. You just play the game, but they add one other thing, which is you need a solo victory condition. So the solo variant has 2 victory conditions that must be met. So 2 things that you have to do. You have to complete this trail, in other words, before we hit October. And you have to complete a solo objective card. And there are 2 categories of them. There's 8 total types of objectives that you can do in solo, and 1 is easy and 1 is advanced. They are little cards, and the idea is you're supposed to shuffle them, pick 1, put it on the board, and then you work towards that the whole time you play on your solo. I don't really have a clean system for doing that, and it wasn't worth setting up a whole deck in Roll20 for it, so all I'm going to do is roll a d8, because the cards are numbered, and whatever one we pick, that'll be our optional goal. It doesn't really matter, because we're probably not going to finish this, because we're going to be stopping and doing little travel logs as we go. Wow, Tammy Morelli says the shoulder surgery recovery is 6 to 9 months. That's brutal. Uncle Kitty says, Zevia, we make soda for those fond of disappointment. Jumpstore says, ironically enough, Rory, this year Hanukkah starts on Christmas. Oh, wow. That's a lovely coincidence. I won't talk too much about the variants. Again, it's a free game if you really want to play it. By the way, if you're confused about the idea of print and play, I don't know what the equivalent would be wherever you live, but like for us, you can usually just take these files on a thumb drive to somewhere like a Staples, and usually they can print it on some cardstock and laminate it and stuff like that. That's how I got my many years ago Cards Against the Humanity game back when it was cool. It's not super hard to do. Okay. Hey, Tammy, I don't know if you've ever used Swipe on a phone, but it lets you write with one thumb, basically. I use it on mine. It's a little bit to get used to, especially left-handed, but it's maybe an option. Okay. Hopefully nobody has any questions, because I want to get to hiking. So, let's zoom in a bit. I like snow, so my only precondition is snow. You can actually start at either end of the trail in this game, but we're going to start in Maine because, and I don't know if it really comes through on the monitor there, but you can see how there's a big blue arc, and at the center of it there's a +1 with a little snowy cloud, and that means there is a +1 odds that it's going to be snowing on any given day. Yeah. And then you see how there's a little, what looks like a Polaroid, but it's blank and it's next to a white dice. What you do there is, if we choose to do, I actually don't have a white dice. I guess this is whitish. If we choose to take a photo, we can roll the photo, and we put the value of that picture into where the blank of the picture would be. So if we rolled a 4, I would write 4 in this. And that's for some optional sub goals and some points later if you're playing competitively or whatever else. Okay. The little huts with stamps are again a point thing, and the antlers are, I believe, let's remind myself. It's been a year since I listened to this list. I don't remember. Hopefully I stumble across it as I go, because I don't want to spend a bunch of time reading quietly now. Let's figure out our optional objective. It doesn't really make much of a change, chat, because we're probably not going to finish this either way, but do you want to do the advanced solo goals or the easy ones? I'm kind of indifferent about it. Once we do, I'm going to roll my D8 and we'll pick one. GS says this map is so lovely. Yeah, there's a lot of love in it. It's definitely had some production value on it. I really like the font on Appalachian. This sort of stylized Christmas tree. There's little moons and stuff on it. Little waterfalls coming out of the P. There's lots of cool stuff here. Easy, since we don't have much time, yeah. Well, I think it's probably not going to matter anyways. Okay, we rolled a 5. I did go like, oh, maybe I should make this a poll, and then traumatizing memories came back to me about how my polls go. I know I need to put this somewhere. I'm trying to remember where I need to put it. This is our goal. And I will read for you a description of that goal, because they give it, you can't see it on yours, but I can see it. Receive 20 plus VP from stamps. You need to get 20 points from stamps, I guess. So that's our optional objective. Just gonna kind of leave it. I don't know if there's a designated place for it, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. That's enough prep. Now, of course, the core of this is writing. Jumpstore says a better font choice than using Papyrus for Avatar. Yeah, if people don't know, the Avatar font is just a really standard font you can use pretty much anywhere. This is my, I don't know how close I can get before this becomes a distorted mess. That's a pretty clear image. This is my little guy. It comes from, this art comes from a game on itch.io. I should have written down the name. But this is where we're starting in this little house. I don't know if I get this stamp or not. I'm going to assume yes. But let's get to know this little fellow first. Do you have any opinions on who this person is? What era we're doing this hike in? The only condition I have is it's snowy. I was thinking it might be interesting to do it in like the 60s. Because, or even the 50s, because that was kind of a big era for hiking. And we get that more no cell phone kind of feel. Because I don't need to worry too much about knowing much culture around it when you're hiking. It's just determines how distant we are from everything. Let me know the era that you guys want to hike in. Also, if you have a name for the dude, let me know. GS says 1940s. It's a solid idea. Sorry, I'm just kind of putting myself in the headspace here. Oh, you know what I can do? I have a little loop of forest sounds. Let's put that on. Donner for the name. Yeah, of course. I like it. It's like either you're a historian or we're a kid in the 80s and 90s who had access to old DOS computers. Where is it though? Winter Forest. There we go. I think I used this on the intro of at least one of my streams. Gonna play. Another thing you're gonna do. Well, I don't know what it's doing. Hopefully eventually it plays. There we go. Okay, that's a little loud. Okay. Donner noticed a patch. He had missed oiling a patch on his canvas backpack. The muddy snow, the muddy slush. of the logging road was purling off the rest of the pack, the sack, and saturating into the one flaw of his handiwork. Jumpstar says, when you said our character would be in the mountains in the winter, I couldn't resist. Good point. Yeah, I hope this Donner brought enough. Well, if he didn't, he's only eaten himself. Which reminds me, if you like cannibalism, I did a stream about it 2 weeks ago. That was an odd episode. As expected, it didn't go very far because obviously YouTube picks up on the taboo topic that advertisers don't want to be seen on. So I expected that. But what I didn't expect is the few that it did ended up showing it to, like, subscribed. Like, I got a lot of... The ratio of subscribers to views off that video is unusually on par with each other. Closer to par with each other, I should say. Let's hope that's my only mistake. Tammy says, how about the Appalachian Mountains for the locations? I've always wanted to go there. Well, funny you should say that. We have no choice. We are in the Appalachian Mountains. That is the game itself mandates that we're there. We're starting in Maine specifically. You ever been to Maine? Jumpstar says, just goes to show YouTube will demonetize anything fun. Well, whatever. I mean, like I said, I'm not, like, opposed to the idea of having more reach, and if people enjoy more of the stream, that'd be great and all that and whatever. But I very obviously am not doing this for views and whatever. It's a hobby that I share with people. Donner grumbled. To himself. Each whisper adding a bit of fog to the winter air. Tammy says, I've been to New York. Not been to New York. Never been really on the East Coast other than like Ontario. Even then I didn't really go very far. I don't really have money to be on planes. GS says, I've watched Maine Cabin Masters. I don't know what that means. Donner. Gave 2 smacks. To shake loose the snow stuck to his hat's sheep skin flaps, then tied them tight. The leather strap under his chin. Yeah, people feel free to look up stuff about Maine, especially in the winter and stuff. If you want to drop stuff in the chat, I'll try to incorporate it. That's sort of the way I thought, you know, I always try to think about how to involve you guys with the lag, right? You know, it'd be great to have you be a character in here, and I could ask you what your character does and interpret it in and basically have a game of D&D, but the lag makes that impossible. So one way that works, because we won't be moving past it too fast, is if you have things in the Vista for me to see as I hike along, that'd be really appreciated. Very fun and cool for me anyways. Hopefully for you as well. If there's something you've seen in the snow before that was entertaining in the forest or whatever, you let me know. He had a long day of hiking ahead, at which he hoped he might find good shelter. Hey, there you are, Witchery. We were talking about you earlier. All kind of things, of course. But his steel pipe and canvas tent would have to do if he didn't. Jumpstore says, according to Google, Maine winters are cold, extremely snowy, and has very few hours of daylight. Oh, okay. Good to know. Witchery says, I wasn't sure if we were on this week. Yeah, I definitely implied we might not be. And then I found P&P Arcade, and I found some games I wanted to play. Like, okay. That's a word I'm sure people won't mind me breaking. In the dark of the early morning, with high steps into the... What kind of trees are in Maine? Is it like cedar or pine or both? Or what? I'm talking about where we might get water. Yeah, I imagine in the winter it's probably a little easier. Witchery says, according to my knowledge of Maine, it's entirely populated by Stephen King characters. That's true, isn't it? Was it Maine where... I know Stephen King did that because Lovecraft did that with where he lived, but where did Lovecraft live? Was it New England? Into the half that shattered the frozen shell on the deep drifts of the road. It's been a while since I've written about snow. This will be a challenge to remind myself. Fir, hemlock, and birch. Donner began weaving his way up through a maze of hemlock. Uncle Kitty said Lovecraft was Rhode Island. I was way off. Skiing, snowshoeing. I've done snowshoeing, and it was surprisingly fun. But that was with another person who was a little better in the cold. I don't think I could talk my current partner into it. Jumpstore says, with all these questions you're asking, where I really wish Zombie was here. Zombie would be on it. That's true. So much horror for a tiny state. I even went snowshoeing on like a Groupon. Is that even still a thing? This was back when Groupon was big. And it was because it was like thawing early, and so it was really wet, like to the point where the snow was still deep, but it was like you could see little rivers beginning to reform on the trail. In the dark of the early morning, with high steps that shattered the frozen shell on the deep snowdrifts by the road, of the road, Donner began weaving his way up through a maze of hemlock and fir that stood as stubble on the side of a high Appalachian. Did I spell that right? Seem to have. Ridge. GS says, no, I don't think there is still Groupon, but I don't know. It certainly isn't as popular as it was. Man, that was such a thing. It was a cool idea, but I don't know how they ever made money. Okay. Chat. Let's look at how to play this game, now that we've introduced it. The Appalachian Trail is played over 16 plus rounds, each consisting of 4 phases. We're not going to play all 16 rounds. You roll dice. We're going to pick dice in a minute. But we need to resolve time and check for extreme weather. Now, what I think is implied here is that you roll your dice all together all at once, but then you pick, I think this is why they're colored, you pick which activities you're going to do and your dice are already rolled. Now, why would you do it that way? Because this game is made for multiple players, one of the conceits of it is the other people don't know what actions you're taking as you try to beat them. So I think that's a way of hiding who's taking what action. It's also a simpler way to roll. I'm not really going to do it that way, though, because I don't really have a dice of all of these colors, I guess. But we do need to at least roll the black dice. Which I do have a black dice. State bird is a little black and white chickadee. I love chickadees. Chickadee-dee-dee. That's what I used to say. And still do, apparently. I rolled a 3. Jumpstore says, I'm not wizened enough with pop culture former fats to understand what Groupon is. I think it also depends on what age you were in 2010. Because if you were not of the age where you had a credit card, then it doesn't mean anything to you. But basically what it was, like, companies would have a deal where it didn't make sense for them to put it out unless enough people bought it. And so what they would do is they put up a time-constrained window where you would buy a ticket for snowshoeing or something. And if enough people bought it, you all got the deal. The black die represents both time and weather. So, time, refer to the value of the black die. 1 to 4, cross off 1 week on the calendar. Well, we did. You'll notice that there, maybe you can't see it. I'll show you on the map where I can zoom in. There is... I don't remember what side it's on now. There it is. You see how next to March and April and whatever, there's 4 boxes? Those are weeks. So I'm going to mark them off. Let's just do black. We got a 3, so that's a 1 to 4, so that's 1 week of the calendar. So we will cover about a week of our hiking. Jump Store says, that would explain a lot. I was still in high school in 2010. Yeah, so then, like, I can't really imagine it would have had much appeal, because if you didn't have a credit card, you couldn't really buy anything. But it was a solid plan. The extreme weather you could face each round is based on the following 3 factors. The value of the black die, which again was 3. The current month's weather trend, which is, I think, 1 to 3. Yep. So it's going to be snow. And your hiker's current location, which will have a weather modifier, which is right up here. It's this blue thing, which means that means that we're in this area. We have a +1 window of getting snow. So actually, right now, being here in Maine in March means that it's a 1 to 4 that gives us snow, if that makes sense for people. Witchery says, "God, hiking for a week, I'd be dead." Well, you don't just do it. You build up to it. But second of all, you'd be surprised. There's like in all these sort of long-term exercise things, which I've done a lot of, there is a point at which going, like, I did some distance cycling, like 120k a day kind of cycling, and when you first start, like 5k to 10k is a big jump, right? And then like 10 to 20k, you're like, I don't think I could ever do this. Then like 20 to 40 starts to get a little easier, and then like 40 to 80 isn't so bad, and for some reason like 80 to 120 is nothing. You barely notice it. You notice that you have to start eating in the middle of it, or you run out of energy. But like, it's a weird thing where, like, the better you get at something, the jumps get easier. Witchery says, "Mistake a Maine Coon for a bobcat." Wonder if that word's gonna get me flagged. Despite being a real one. Okay. So we've been traveling for a week. It's snowing that entire week. Okay, and then we have to consume water. For each week that was crossed off during step 2A, consume 1 from your water supply. And then there's weather effects that can up it. During snow, it says -2. Now, does that mean I don't cross off water? I think so. Maybe it just means I'm picking it up as I go. I'm going to say no. I don't know. Anybody else can interpret that differently. And then in secret, you select 2 dice for your actions. So we need to know what action we're doing. Which feels like a thing worth having a vote about. Yeah. Jumstore says, "That reminds me of a Reddit thread where a hiking guide was saying how annoyed she was when people weren't honest about their hiking experience and the hike would suffer as a result." Yeah, you got to be honest about that. You know what has a real problem with that? So I'm this is a weird thing to say, but I'm a fan of alpine climbing. Kind of fallen out of the loop of it, but for a while there, I could tell you all the major players in it, whatever. I just really enjoyed it. Anyways, I only did really minimal stuff, but I watched stuff like Uli Steck, rest in peace, but he did some impressive things. A lot of them are dead for obvious reasons. But a real problem was people who would there just wasn't much due diligence done by the people who would take people up Everest. Because in many ways, Everest, were the atmosphere not a problem, is kind of just a hike. There's parts of it that are tough, but not as tough as you would think. Everest as an actual climb isn't super hard. It's high, and that's the problem. But to be able to do that, to be able to manage altitude like that, you need experience. You can't just be in shape. You have to be used to climbing at that height. And some people just fundamentally can't do it. It's nothing to do with fitness level or anything like that. Smokers have climbed Everest, and marathon runners can't handle the altitude. Like, it's a genetic thing, if anything. And people would lie. Or they just wouldn't check, and the Sherpas would take them up, and they just couldn't walk back down, and they'd have to leave them. So there was a push to be like, you need to take some responsibility for who you're taking up. What mountains have they climbed? Why do they think they're able to do this? Okay. Well, I think at least one thing we need to do is move. That's probably the only thing we need to do, honestly. I'm not even going to have a vote. We need to move. So I'm going to roll our two... Well, they're orange, but mine are yellow dice. Oh, man. Look at that. I wish I rolled like that when I was playing the one deck dungeon that this dice is from. 12. We made good time. So, you might consume additional energy depending on the weather effects. Snow must affect that, right? Let's see. Is there something on this map that tells me about how snow affects them? Oh yeah, that's what this is. Oh, okay, I see it. I understand the rules now. In the snow, we consume a normal amount of water. So we went 1 week, so we're down 1 water. Do that. But hiking means that we consume an extra 2 energy. So, of our 12, I think we only moved 10. That's my understanding of this. Okay. And I think each... Whoops. I think each of these pips is what represented here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're 1 away from our shelter. And we're almost out of Maine. Well, I used both my moves for movement, both my dice, so I can't take the picture, but maybe I should have. By the evening, or at least as the sun once the light faded. What am I saying? There's gotta be a better way to get this card. The next week was marked by long days. trail breaking. Because we said it was the 40s. I don't think there was a lot of like pre-configured trails like there is now. That's my guess. Probably doing some pretty rustic hiking. GS says, oh, that's cute, like a board game. Yeah, it's a little board game. If you have kids who might be interested in something like this, you know, you can print it off and do it that way. The next week was marked by long days of trail breaking. Broken up. By quiet nights. Over smoldering fires. Donner barely spoke. After the third day, breaking his not even the right use of that. It's a little bit wrong, but it's close enough. Breaking his solemn march to occasionally call after the chickadees. They're probably not even out in the winter. Somebody in Maine is like, yeah, because it's the internet, not because they're from Maine. Witcher says, wait, I just noticed the name, Donner and being in the snow. 3 guesses who gave me that name. Donner barely spoke after the third day, breaking his solemn march to occasionally call after the chickadees. Do you see shelter? Or an open trail? That way. Birdie? To which the birds responded. Chickadee. Donner would then nod in affirmation, as if he understood completely. We're talking about wintry movies that are R-rated comedy. I mean, the one that comes to mind for me is Bad Santa, which is a hard one to recommend for a few reasons, but is one that I genuinely enjoyed. If I'm thinking of the right name, I think it is. It's the one with Billy Bob Thornton in it. It's dark, though. Jump Story was talking about someone getting killed camping in the woods, not being near a designated campsite, and GS says, I always wondered about wilderness murders. I envisioned some murderer hanging around for months saying, geez, business is slow. Witchery says, swearing makes something R-rated. Is America okay? Witchery, let me tell you a story to summarize North American norms for you. I used to work in a video store. This is where I make a crack about being that old. At one point, I might have told this story on stream. I must have, because I've told this a lot. But at one point, this guy came in. And he was upset with me for a movie he'd rented for his child. Because it was an 18A raunchy comedy. We're kind of in the era of that. And he said to me, you know, this is not appropriate for kids. And I was like, yeah, that's why it's 18A. And he said, yeah, but it's a comedy. And I thought that was funny. That he thought a comedy was okay. And then, of all the things, there was a lot of stuff in that comedy. There was violence, swearing, whatever else. He goes, actually, I realize I'm going to tell you two stories. He goes, yeah, but I came downstairs and there was a naked woman. That was the breaker for him. The other one was Remembrance Day, which I think is the same the world over, but if I'm wrong about that, in Canada is November 11th. And he it was a different guy. He was coming in with his son. He asked if he could rent Saving Private Ryan. And I said, unfortunately, Saving Private Ryan is always rented out on Remembrance Day. And he said, maybe I could show him Apocalypse Now, but is it true there's nudity in it? I was like, well, yeah. Especially Redux, which was the big one at that point, has a stripping scene in it. I was like, yeah, you know, you could fast forward through it if you want. It's not super crucial to the plot. I said, but it's certainly not worse than anything in Saving Private Ryan. If your kid is used to that, like, yeah, Saving Private Ryan doesn't have nudity, but it's extremely violent. And he goes, well, that's, you know, real life. He's got to know about that stuff. And that is stuck with me for like the 20 some odd years that I've heard it. Your kid is probably going to see someone naked in their life. They're not going to, hopefully, go to war and see a bunch of dead people. Like, naked is also real life. But there is a good packaging of stories. There's more I could tell of the weird ethics of the North Americans. Ooh, that's rough, Jim Store. Witchery says, man has never seen stand-up if he thinks all comedy is for kids. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right, Witchery. That's what I was thinking. I was like, even at that time, the internet was accessible enough. Like, I understand the instinct there, but, like, the fact that they didn't see a problem with one of the most extremely gruesome movies I can think of. And it not in like a campy way either. Donner would then nod in affirmation, as if he understood completely. Ooh. A Simple Plan is an effective movie. Donner would then nod in affirmation, as if he understood completely. The worst night of the week through Maine. Was a long lake crowned on either side by unstable shelves of snowfall. So I guess what I would say to that is, like, I think it's fair to say you don't want your kid to see too much nudity and sexualization at a young age. But if you're also okay with a bunch of really gruesome violence, I don't respect that view. If I had to pick, which I don't have kids, I don't really care. Obviously, the other one is a lot less problematic than that one. Jumpstar, are you considering making this the story that you apply your workshop to? The worst night of the week through Maine was a long lake crowned on either side by unstable shelves of snowfall. Donner didn't trust it. Especially with the sharp gales that built up over the wide frozen lake. He had no choice then but to stay out of the tree line. Where a wash of heavy snow could catch and bury him. Witcher says, God, I am sick of autocorrect. I am definitely reaching a point where I understand I've become dependent on it, but I hate it. Those nights when the wind snuffed any fire and the sheepskin coat, sheepkin, was as transparent, as thin as silk in the gusts against the gusts. Were the most fearful. He didn't stop shivering for the better part of 2 days and began to fear he may succumb. Jumpstore says, as tempting as it would be to write a horror story about an axe killer in the forest, I feel like it's been done before. I mean, it has, but not by you. I'm sure you have your own influences and ideas to bring in. Gia says, I'm getting cold reading Rory's story. Oh, good. Uncle Kitty says, for TV series, I'd recommend Deadlock. Letterkenny. That's a deep pull. I didn't know that show had really made it across the South. I thought it was like Trailer Park Boys, where it kind of had maybe a bit of a following, but it was mostly a Canadian thing. And Fargo. I never watched the series. I mean, the movie's really good, but I don't know the series that well. Does Letterkenny even make sense? Because it barely makes sense on the west coast of Canada, where I know how the east coast is. His appetite was at once gnawing, but anything he ate sat heavy in his stomach, as if he was surviving by the fire of adrenaline alone. Yeah, I agree. Jump Store, Uncle Kitty has great movie recommendations. Should start a little blog on Uncle Kitty. Also, Jump Store, I know I've said it before, but that is just the cutest popcorn emoji. Most the lakes passed this way, but the size and nature of that one was memorable. Most of all, for its dire threat against him, his survival. Donner began the trek away from these high mountain lakes. And the air warmed slightly, but mostly the tree. He returned the trees that broke the piercing gales. When he could feel his feet and fingers again, he said to a snow owl, "I should have taken a picture." And tried to capture how the lightest snow glitters in the dim winter sun. And sweeps like galaxies, forming in the wind. Mr. Owl. To which the pale owl responded with a knowing, wide-eyed glance. GS says, is Donner going to light a fire? I was thinking that like the wind off this wide lake probably precluded it. I was thinking that I would, at the end of the week, he finally finds a place where it's like dry enough he can light the fire. GS says 1940s hiker, I think gross coffee. Jumpstore says, I see, so even Donner prefers coffee instead of the broth of gods. At this point in history, at this location, it's going to be coffee. America didn't even really consider much tea in the 40s in Maine. Tammy says, I like any kind of comedy. I do find comedy interesting because comedy is one of those things that people have very strong opinions about, but it is so clearly generationally and culturally bound, right? Like, there is no universal comedy. And I find that so interesting. Donner nodded. In solemn reply to the wise old owl. It was on the 7th day. The Donner found a nook in the side. What kind of stone? This is such a rock climber question, but what kind of stone is the Appalachian Mountains? Is it like granite like everything else, or is there something specific to it? Witchery says a certain American Pie was pretty universally comedic when I was in high school. Which one? I heard lots of them at the time. I don't know if I've ever watched American Pie beginning to end, but it was like a big... I was in the pocket for it. Like, I was the generation, my friends had all watched it. I just don't remember if I did. I will say the closest... It's not my favorite kind of comedy, but I would say the closest to like a universal joke. Through history, you find that that particular style of joke in everywhere is fart humor. It's kind of hard to argue with. Like, it is, even if it's kind of gross to you or whatever else, there is still just something inherently bizarre about it, right? Oh, that's right, Witchery. I should have gotten that. You are correct. The side of a ridge. It didn't go back very far, so he had no fear that hibernating bears were in it. GS says sandstone. Sandstone? Really? Appalachian Mountain is sandstone? Conglomerate and shales. Shale, I could see. I don't know. That just seems... How far south does it go? Like, Georgia isn't that far south. I guess I don't really understand the stone veins of America. Jumpstore says, talking about having to keep coffee down. You gotta do your best to keep it down no matter how gross. To my credit, the only times I vomited, aside from childhood illnesses, was due to my period cramps. Boy, that's brutal. I've heard of a lot of effects from period cramps, but I've never heard of people vomiting with them. Sorry to hear that. Witchery says it varies based on location. Indeed, but usually there's some similarity in a mountain range. but I would not have guessed sandstone. It didn't go back very far, so he had no fear that hibernating bears were in it. It was the first time in several days that he could light a fire. It was small, but ever so precious. And a kind of warmth that is hard to describe to those who could find shelter whenever they please. It has a lot of sedimentary rock, volcanic rock, and even some ancient ocean floor. It's also the same mountain range as the Scottish Highlands. Interesting. Yeah, I do know that. It's the same kind of story with the Hawaiian Isles witchery. The smaller islands are smaller because they're older. Wow, that's an interesting mix. Now, I don't know what kind of climbing there is in there, because most of the climbing is along the kind of very hard granite seam that runs basically from British Columbia, where I am, down all the way down to California. And then there's, of course, the Red Rocks and stuff are a little bit different. That's the other main area. But the two main areas you climb in North America really are Squamish, which is near me, and obviously, why am I blanking on its name? The most famous climbing spot in California, in the world. How have I forgotten this? It's got the Dawn Wall. Caldwell climbed it. Why can't I think of the name of the park? It's near Jericho Park. Anyways. Well, that's rough, Gemstore. I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, obviously, that's a rough experience across the board, as I understand it. But that's particularly rough. Donner pulled out his dented tin kettle, packed some snow into it. Jumpstore says, as for green jellied salad, I have no idea what it is, but it sounds gross. Well, that is a historical anomaly that we thankfully left behind. The short version is it's food that you would put in a salad, but set in Jell-O, usually lime. The long version is Jell-O was like a really cool, impressive new food stuff to the royals in the 19th century. And so when the 20th century rolled around and the 50s was all about impressive dinner parties, people wanted to make reference to these old stuffy queen type meals. And so it became kind of in vogue to put stuff in Jell-O. For a long time, man. It was like 20 years of it. Horrible. I don't think anyone ever liked it. Well, at least they have the kindness to send you home when you're sick. Uncle Kitty says, that sounds awful, Roy. It is. If you don't know it, don't seek it out. But if you open a cookbook from like 1972, you'll find it. It'll be somewhere. As Donner pulled out his dented tin kettle, packed some snow into it, and set it on the fire. Over the next few quiet moments, the lattice of frozen snowflakes dissolved into a bubbling pool of steaming water. Jumpstore says, never liked Jell-O even before I became a vegetarian. I'm okay on it. It's not really a thing I go out of my way to seek out, but there's some contexts I like it in. And yeah, I guess being vegetarian precludes it. Yeah. For those who don't know, which I don't know who that would be at this point, but gelatin is made of animal bones. Usually, anyways. I'm sure someone out there has made some version of it that you could have, but yeah. It's not my favorite. It's just kind of interesting sometimes. If anyone likes podcasts, Old Gods of Appalachia is a great horror podcast. I think I've been recommended this before, Witchery. Maybe by you, but I think actually it was somebody in Meat Space. Witchery slides slowly away with her box of jelly crystals. And that's fine. It's obviously well loved. There's a bar that I don't know what it is, but it's basically like a sort of shortbread crust and then a bit of a cream layer, and then they put Jell-O on top of it. And it's a denser Jell-O, like they sort of half the water or something like that. Witcher says I've mentioned it before. Probably, yeah. My memory is sort of a fog of impressions. Nothing too detailed, unless it's just something I happen to very detailed remember. Donner popped the cap off his Folgers can. I'm assuming there was a Folgers can in the 40s. Let me know how anachronistic that is, I suppose. And poured his best estimation of the right amount of coffee into his elixir of steaming snow. When he finally sipped the bitter brew, it reached like mother's breath across his chest, and he could do little else but smile. He'd made it. Winter in the main mountains. Few could make that claim. Or, at least, few with lips still pliable enough to speak. He knew this was a risky hike for a risky time, but he wanted to finish the Appalachian Trail this summer. And that required an early go of it. Jumpstart says Folgers. According to the FDA, this counts as coffee. Yeah, I'm not going to go out of my way and defend Folgers. If you like it, you like it. That's fine. It's the epitome of we've cooked it so long it tastes the same no matter what bean we put in there. It's not my thing. Like most things culinary, I'm a weird little obsessive nerd about it. So I'm an obsessive nerd about coffee. I have gadgets and opinions and different roasts, so on and so forth. But I think it's really boring, so I don't really bring it up here. Boring for most people, not me. Jumpstore says Dandies is my favorite brand of vegan marshmallows. I highly recommend. I am not a person who likes sweets. Really, like I regularly find things too sweet. I didn't really eat marshmallows that much as a kid, but I love marshmallows. There's just something about them. They're just perfect. Witchery says, is Folgers the one that had the incest ad? I mean, probably. The 1960s and 70s and 80s were a pretty wild time for advertising. No, that was Maxwell House, Witchery. Okay. I'll have to look this up later. GS says, is it a full moon like tonight? Sure. So proud was Donner of his progress. He just sat and watched the moon fill the sky with its eerie light. When the fire was low. Small rodent, probably a mouse. Scurried through the clearing. Or Donner, clearing Donner, had swept up to lay the flame. It sat by the warm stones. Taking quick and short breaths. Little creatures often do. And nibbled at the peanut shells he had tossed in the fire. It didn't seem to notice Donner lying in the crevice with his woolen blankets. He watched the little thing for a moment before asking, "Do you want some seeds?" "Little sir?" The creature froze in place, breathing quick, then made its mad dash back into the frozen underbrush. I suppose not, then. He said, and rolled over back to sleep. Oh, apparently the Maxwell House is a YouTube channel parody. Does Donner smoke? Who didn't in the 40s? There were definitely people who didn't smoke in the 40s, but yeah, probably. Okay, let's go back to the game for a moment. And let's see what we do. Alright, so again, first off, we roll the black die, figure out time and weather. So 1. Jump Story, you know what I get ads for? Stuff for like postmenopausal women in their 60s, like how to do exercise to increase bone mass while being in your chair and stuff. And I don't know what I've done to get on like postmenopausal symptom management ads and whatever else. I don't know. In many ways, I'm off the algorithm grid because I spend most of my time on Mastodon if I'm going to be on social media, or in fairly siloed discords. And I don't really give it a lot of content to go on, so I guess it's just making guesses. Uncle Kitty says probably a pipe. Yeah, my grandfather smoked a pipe. And this would have been kind of his era. One to 4. Cross off 1 week on the calendar. So it's another 1 week. Our man is making good time. Mystery solved. Jump Store. They must have seen the pun. Witchery says, I have like 7 pipes that were my grandfather's. I'm not this old, nor was he. Oh, really? Is your grandfather a younger guy? Yeah, my grandfather died in the 90s. And yeah, he smoked a pipe. Witcher says, Rory, do you perhaps publicly proclaim your love of the Golden Girls? I've never actually watched the Golden Girls, but they come up culturally so much that it's hard to miss. Do I do anything else that would be... I don't know. I guess I just do not exactly youthful things. I don't know. Well, Uncle Kitty says apparently pipes were iron? Treated wood or iron? Who smokes a cast iron pipe? No kidding. Which says it's still a good show, you need to watch it. Maybe I do. In the long list of shows I need to watch, though, I'm going to say it's probably pretty low. Okay. Chat, just a little choice here. This will be kind of the cap of the game, I guess, for now. Unless we want to come back to it, which this is a game I'm fine to come back with because I like describing nature, and that's all this really is. We have a choice of activities. You know what? I'll make this one a... what's the word I'm looking for here? A poll. How should we spend our last day in Maine? Take a photograph. Witcher says they had a lot of groundbreaking episodes. One standing up for LGBTQ+. That's pretty impressive for the time. Confronting various isms. You know what? I wouldn't say it did a great job of it, but what was interesting is the other day I caught the tail end of the original Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan the Barbarian. And the first thing, I hadn't watched that in years, since I was like a kid. And the first thing that really stuck out for me was how heavy-handed it was about its political inclusivity and so on. Like, it even ends on a line about, like, you know, even a woman could do this or something. Like, it's very clumsy or whatever. But I was like, immediately, as I was watching this show that is considered sort of the summary of masculinity of the 80s movies, I was like, if this came out today, there would be so many annoying YouTube videos with, like, you know, Conan wokest show ever ruins the comics, blah, blah, blah. Like, it would be so tedious. And it just reminded me how much we live in a current cultural bubble that thinks the past wasn't what it was. Receive a stamp at a shelter. Well, we do have a shelter in this one. Get a shelter stamp. Rest. And move. Basically what I'll do here, which will solve our problem, is the top 2 results we'll use as our 2 dice. Yes, Jump Store, it's very much that. Like, it isn't it isn't exactly progressive per se. But it certainly makes an effort towards it. Okay. I'll give you folks a couple of minutes to vote there. The votes again are, we can take a photograph, so we can do 2 of these. take a photograph, get a shelter stamp, rest, or keep moving. Yeah. And the question is, how should we spend our last day in Maine? And I'll give you guys a few minutes there. Yeah, I'm not really saying much more about the show. I mean, it's sort of, it knows what it is. It's a sort of campy B movie about, you know, big muscle men having a fight. But it was interesting to watch it and just realize how toxic internet culture would interpret it now. It reminded me, this is such a weird pull, but it reminded me a bit of like that scene in Birdcage where I forget who is doing it exactly, whether it's Nathan Lane or he was the one in Birdcage. It was Nathan Lane and Robin Williams in Birdcage, I think. And they're trying to act straight. And so they said, you know, you need to be like tough and manly like John Wayne. And so he goes and walk like John Wayne. And it's a really, let's say, slightly effeminate walk. And at the end of it, whoever it was, I think it's Nathan Lane who does it, goes like, did I get it wrong? And Robin Williams just goes, I'm barely remembering this scene, but he just goes, no, but I'm just realizing how John Wayne used to walk. And it was the same kind of thing where like just our collective memory of history is a little weird. Jump Store says this will be the cap of the game. Me, no cap, slang pun, glasses on. Yes, I am one of your kids. Skibbity toilet. No cap. We're talking about beating up bears with iron pipes, but like smoking pipes. You probably don't need to beat up a bear. Most part, they just avoid people. Okay, I'll give it about another minute, and then I'll stop the poll and we'll wrap this up. Ending the poll. Okay, take a photograph and get a shelter stamper. The top two tied. It has to be a tie or it wouldn't be a varietal quiz. But that's okay. In this case, a tie is fine. So let's describe that and call it. Okay. So taking a photograph requires me to roll the white dice. This is the closest I have to a white dice. And, oh, I see. It's only going to let me do one of these. Because you only have one dice per round. Well, the next one was rest. So I'll have to do with that. I misunderstood the rules. Sorry about that, folks. Let's do the photograph. Oh, it's a garbage photograph, I think. It's one. What would there be? I guess just some sort of mountain peak? I don't know what there is to take a picture of in Maine. Because I don't really know Maine. And then resting is a green dice. And we recover energy equal to the value of the green die by erasing previously crossed off spaces on our energy track. We moved 10. Right. Where's our energy track? Here. So we were down to... here. So every day, or whatever, every pip that we moved, which was, we rolled 2 6s, so it was 12, and then we took 2 off for the snow. So we'd moved 10 pips. We now are going to rest and recover some of that. And I do have a green dice. It is a 5. So we'll get rid of these. The next morning, the path wound up again, upwards again. Into the gray but glowing clouds. Shaking themselves free of snow. Not glowing, like luminescent. Everything gets kind of like catches more light when snow is out. Not 4 hours from his camp, below, he found the proper shelter and kicked himself for not pushing that bit further. Farther, not further. The ink for the shelter stamp. I know this isn't quite how they work, but it's the 40s, and I don't think they really did this in the 40s, so I'm sort of backfilling it a bit to be an unmanned place. The ink for the shelter stamp was frozen. And you couldn't get it to mark his journal. Instead, he decided to pull out his old camera, snap a picture of the lake far below that nearly killed him. That, he figured, would be proof enough that he made it to this waypoint. On the edge. Where are we? New Hampshire, I think. NH. If there's some other NH I don't know, let me know. Again, Americans, I don't really know your geography, but also I don't feel that bad because I'm sure you don't know ours. That, he figured, would be proof enough that he made it to this waypoint on the border, marking the border of New Hampshire. It took a bit to set it all up, and he wasn't certain that moisture hadn't stained film stock. But he hoped it would come out, because it was a hell of a shot to have to come back and do again. Jumpstore says, funny enough, Rory, Americans don't even know American geography. I mean, that's probably true of Canadians, to be honest, as well. Like, they don't tend to know Canada that well either. Donner hacked the camera. Back into his spare long johns. Then pushed on into the morning winds of the high Appalachian peaks. All right. How do we feel about this game? Because I feel like I could, if people are interested in it. I mean, it really is just sort of, I mean, I'm sure an emergent story could come out. I don't really have one in mind, but they often do. It is just kind of nature description of the game, but it is one that I'd be willing to come back to maybe seasonally, right? Like as there's a change in the season, just like I kind of did with Floating Bookshop. Because eventually we're going to get into places where it's summery. And then back into the fall. Obviously we're a little early on it, but maybe I could come back to it in January or something. Tammy loves it. That's good. Well, let me know. I do think structurally it's a solid game. Oh, that's sad, Jumpstore. I kind of would have guessed that if I'm being honest, but yeah. Structurally, it's a pretty solid game. It has like a bit of resource management and choice, but it's not so heavy duty that I feel like it bogs the stream down. Jumpstore says, I'd love to return to this game. Great. And we will. I don't know when I'll come back, but yeah, looking at this, we're still in snowy weather for 2 more weeks. And then into April, we even still get some snow. So we'll probably do another game in the winter. Awesome. I'm glad I took a chance on this one. And, yeah, if we are really interested in the T game, it's not really a game about journaling, but I feel like it isn't too hard to use it as a structure for journaling. We'll see about that. Jumpstore says I want to see if Donner survives without needing to eat his own legs. I don't plan to take a dark turn, but we never know. Witchery says, it seems good to me, though I was napping through the first bit. That's okay. It was pretty chill. Like I said, as much as I enjoy Halloween, by the end of Hella stream, I was like done with darkness for a little while. So it was nice to do something that wasn't dark. I don't really have any problem with dark stories or violence or whatever. Just after doing it so many times, especially given that it's been a kind of dark year for the world in terms of violence. I wanted something to remind me that I do like the world. This game did that. Okay. Zevia. Sweet as antifreeze. All right. Let's read this story back then. If you're coming to this part of the show, it's because you just want to know what we came up with. And what we did was we played a game that is technically a board game, but I think it lends really well if you're the kind of person who likes doing sort of nature description and travel logs. It lends really well to journaling. And that's what we did, sort of. We did it more like a third-person limited story, but it is essentially a travel log in a different way. It's called Through the Appalachian, and I got it on the website PNP Arcade, whose logo is cut off here, but it's pnparcade.com. I got it for free. I don't know much about PNP Arcade. PNP stands for Print and Play. They have sort of print your own board games, so they give you digital files. As always, not an endorsement per se. I didn't have any problems with them, but, you know, mind your data and all that if you're going to go through random websites and buy things. But this game was a free one. You can get it there. It was really well made. I want to show you this whole map again. Just like well put together. It's elegant for how much complexity it employs, and it's about hiking through the Appalachian Trail. I've never been on the Appalachian Trail or any of the states concerned, so chat was helping me out a bit with trying to localize this. But we started in Maine in winter because it's wintry and we wanted to hike in the snow. And we made it just outside of Maine to New Hampshire. And that's what this part of the story talks about. Actually, let me, as much as I like this music, and I think it is appropriate, I'm just going to use my ambience for a moment. Because I think it's going to be better tone for the story. Donner noticed he'd missed oiling a patch on his canvas backpack. The muddy slush of the logging road was purling off the rest of the sack and saturating into this one flaw in his handiwork. Let's hope that's my only mistake, Donner grumbled to himself, each whisper adding a bit of fog to the winter air. Donner gave 2 smacks to shake loose the snow stuck to his hat's sheepskin flaps, then tied them together with their leather strap under his chin. He had a long day of hiking ahead, at the end of which he hoped he might find a good shelter, but his steel pipe and canvas tent would have to do if he didn't. In the dark of early morning, with high steps that shattered the frozen shell over the deep snow drifts by the road, Donner began weaving his way up through a maze of hemlock and fir that stood as stubble on the chin of a high Appalachian ridge. The next week was marked by long days of trail breaking. Broken, good word variety there, Mr. Writer. Broken by quiet nights over smoldering fires. Donner barely spoke by the third day, breaking his solemn march to occasionally call after the chickadees, saying things like, "Do you see shelter or an open trail that way, birdie?" To which the birds responded, "Chickadee-dee-dee." Donner would then nod in affirmation as if he understood completely. The worst nights of the week through Maine was a long lake crowned on either side by unstable shelves of snowfall. Donner didn't trust those shelves, especially with the sharp gales that built up over the wide frozen lake, so he had no choice then but to stay out of the tree line where a wash of heavy snow could catch and bury him. Those nights, then, When the wind snuffed any fire and the sheepskin coat was as thin as silk against the gusts, became the most fearful. He didn't stop shivering for the better part of 2 days and began to fear he may succumb to the cold. His appetite was at once gnawing, but anything he ate sat heavy in his stomach, as if he was surviving by the fire of adrenaline alone. Most of the lakes passed this way. Most of the lakes along the trail passed him by in this way, but the size and nature of that one was memorable most of all for its dire threat against his survival. Donner began the trek away from these high mountain lakes, and the air warmed slightly, but mostly he returned to the trees, later in the week, I should say, that broke the piercing gales. When he could feel his feet and fingers again, he said to a snow owl up high in a hemlock, "Should have taken a picture, tried to capture how the lightest snow glitters in the dim winter sun, sweeps like little galaxies forming on the wind, Mr. Owl." To which the pale owl responded with a knowing, wide-eyed glance. "Ooh." Donner nodded in a solemn reply to the wise old owl. It was on the 7th day that Donner found a nook in the side of a ridge. It didn't go back very far, so he had no fear that hibernating bears were in it. But it did protect from the wind, and it was the first time in several days, therefore, that he could light a fire. It was small, but ever so precious, and a kind of warmth that is hard to describe to those who could find shelter whenever they pleased. Donner pulled out his dented tin kettle, packed some snow into it, and set it on the fire. Over the next few quiet moments, the lattice of frozen snowflakes dissolved into a bubbling pool of steaming water. Donner popped the cap off his Folgers can and poured his best estimation of the right amount of coffee into his elixir of steaming snow. When he finally sipped to the bitter brew, it reached like mother's breath across his chest, and he could do little else but smile. He'd made it. Winter in the Maine mountains. Few could make that claim, or at least few with lips still pliable enough to speak. He knew this was a risky hike at a risky time, but he wanted to finish the Appalachian Trail this summer, and that required an early go of it. So proud was Donner of his progress, he just sat and watched the full moon rise to fill the sky with its eerie light, doing no further hiking that day. When the fire was low, a small rodent, probably a mouse, scurried through the clearing Donner had swept up for his camp. It sat by the warm stones of his dying fire, taking the quick and short breaths little creatures often do, and nibbled at the peanut shells he'd tossed towards the fire. It didn't seem to notice Donner lying in the stone crevice with his woolen blankets. He watched the little thing for a moment before asking, "Do you want some seeds, little sir?" The creature froze in place, breathing quick, then made its mad dash back into the frozen underbrush. "I suppose not, then," he said, and rolled back over to sleep. The next morning the path wound upwards again, into the gray but luminescent clouds shaking themselves free of snow. Not 4 hours from his camp below, he found a proper shelter, and kicked himself for not pushing that bit farther. The ink for the shelter stamp was frozen, and he couldn't get it to mark his journal, so instead he decided to pull out his old camera and snap a picture of the lake far below that had nearly killed him. That, he figured, would be proof enough that he'd made it to this waypoint, marking the north border of New Hampshire. It took a bit to set it all up, and he was certain that moisture hadn't stained the film stock, but he hoped it would have... He wasn't certain, I should say, that moisture hadn't stained the film stock, but he hoped it would come out, because it was a hell of a shot to come back and do over. Donner packed the camera back into his spare long johns and then into his sack, and pushed on into the morning winds of the high Appalachian peaks of New Hampshire. That's as far as we made it. Let me put my music back on. And pause my wind. We're talking about old commercials. GS says, my candy trivia I saw today, Skittles caused the highest glucose spike with Sour Patch Kids close behind. Sour Patch Kids are one of the few candies I can eat. That's a shame. I know that sour stuff is generally has more sugar, but I can't really... I'm not sure what would... I guess Skittles really are just basically corn syrup in a candy shell. And we're talking about I Can't Believe It's Not Brother. GS is really comforting narrative, Rory. Yeah. GS says, oh, come on, salted licorice is just dirt. Tammy says, I want to thank Rory and everyone for the support for my surgery. Well, that's a rough time to go through, Tammy. I'll miss joining in on the stream, but I'll definitely be here in the background. I hope everyone has a wonderful night. I hope you do find a way to occasionally drop in. Let us know what's going on. That is a rough surgery. I've never really mentioned this because it wasn't very meaningful to mention. But what I will say is, as a rock climber, I know a lot of people with some serious shoulder injuries. It's one of the common ones you get. That and ankle injuries are the two. And shoulder cuff ripped and whatever else. And it is a rough one. I do not envy that. On top of the fact you go through all that surgery and sometimes it just doesn't even take. Like, I understand how stressful and tough that can be. And if nothing else, that's why we do the streams. To hang out, forget about stuff for 2 hours. Witchery says, thanks for the stream, Ray. It's good to see all those who could be here. Indeed. And anybody lurking, I guess normally I call it Uncle Kitty, but he's here. So I guess Zombie Wolf, if you're out there lurking. Hope you enjoyed the game. And yeah, I guess we'll come back to this one. I'm not sure exactly when, as with all the stories. We'll see if this year I actually finish that one game I was trying to make last year, and then I just kind of ran out of time. Sort of a Alone Among the Stars hack, but with Christmas decorations. And that'd be cool. We'll see what else I find. Last year I tried to play like Christmas games and there was almost none. And then this year, I don't know why it didn't occur to me last year. I could just play games and set them at Christmas time. And obviously, we're gonna have to go back to the Floating Bookshop. It started at Christmas. That was my Christmas game. So we'll do Floating Bookshop at some point in December. Anyhow, thank you very much, Jumstore, GS, Uncle Kitty, Witchery, Tammy, Genera. Not sure if I'm forgetting anybody else, but thank you, everybody in the chat. And of course, if you're out there lurking, feel free to lurk. Everybody take care of each other. And as I so kindly say each time, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Get out of my shop!
Du ska vara snälla barn här.